Okay, so I came across this thing on Facebook Marketplace. It was posted for 1,500. Went over there, just offered him 500 on the spot, and he said, "Okay, take it." Told me a whole story. Blah blah. He replaced much more than $500 worth of parts into this thing, so he just sold it for parts. He said it needs a completely new engine. I bought it thinking that I can rebuild the engine. He basically told me he changed the oil once and there was metal shavings in it. So what I'm thinking is, when you buy these things from the dealer, I recommend changing the oil after like literally 5 miles, and then after maybe 50 miles just to break it in. Pretty sure he changed the oil from the dealer after 1,000 miles. That's why there was metal shavings in here. Changed the oil, ran great, and he basically said that it just ran and then it just started getting worse and worse. Okay, so basically, long story short, the engine blew up. So this video is going to be kind of a guide on how to rebuild the engine, or how I rebuilt it. So if you guys are interested in following along, or maybe looking on how to rebuild one of these things, or just curious, go ahead and watch the video. Anything shown in the video, please do it at your own risk. If you break something while following along with the video, that is not my fault. So with that out of the way, to take apart the engine is fairly straightforward. Just go ahead and unscrew bolts and just take it apart. I didn't have the full video. My dad just took it apart while I was away, so here we go. Some of this video will be a voiceover. I'll be providing as much information as I can, so let's get this rebuild underway. Okay, something that might be confusing is taking the primary clutch off. So what you do is the easiest way to do this is to get soapy water. So you get about 4 pumps of soap into like a 1/4 cup of water. You go ahead and you unscrew the main bolt that's holding this on, and you take the other part of the clutch off. You get the soapy water, you go ahead and you pour it inside the primary clutch, and then you get the original bolt, put Teflon tape around the thread, and you re-thread it in. It's reverse threaded, so that's one thing. With threading it in with an impact gun, it should be able to just pop off, and that's how you take off the primary clutch. So here's everything that went wrong with my engine. As you can see, all the sludge buildup from the oil kind of on the bottom of the case, that's what caused it to blow up. It built up shavings and it wasn't really providing the lubrication. Here's where the crankcase sits against the actual case of the engine. What we did with this part was we just got whetstones and we filed it down to the aluminum. The bearings were replaced. They were pressed out and pressed in with a press machine and a certain socket that fits the bearing. And obviously the main thing is the piston rod snapped off. So got all new parts for that, and we started rebuilding it. Okay, so one big thing was the actual crankcase was busted. So long story short, let's just go ahead and skip to the rebuild. We just welded this thing together, with a little bit of skill from a friend. We didn't weld it shut, we just welded the broken pieces back onto each side of the case. Kind of looks maybe like we welded it together, but here we go. So if you have this part of the transmission taken apart, we have this part of the manual that shows you how to put it back together. So if you need any of this information, go ahead and pause the video. So for this part here, I have this page, and lube everything up, so like all the bearings, so once you get it in the machine or whatever and you get it started, it doesn't seize up. Basically put oil around the bearings between every gear, kind of where oil would be in a normal engine. You want to put it in all the balls of the bearings. So here's where the last few gears of the transmission go. So you got a washer right there. That slides on, and kind of the teeth of that gear go inside the grooves of the gear below that. So here you have the parking brake engagement arm, you could call it. You want to go ahead and get that situated correctly, and then slide the actual shifter arms into the correct hole. After you get that situated, just go ahead and set in your shifting drum into the correct spot. It just goes right by it. So it might be slightly tricky to set it in correctly, but you just gotta wiggle it around and pick the
top arm up a little bit just to get it into the correct spot. And then you want to twist the drum once you get it set in all the way clockwise, and that should be in parking brake. Once you have that done, we can move on to the other side of the case. So just go ahead and position this case on the edge of the table so the crankshaft could slide through.
The balancer has where's the mark? On here? That's the only mark?
Right here.
So it has two marks. Here's the first mark, which lines up with your crankshaft. Here's the mark on your crankshaft that lines up with that mark. It's right there. And then here's our second mark, which will line up. We'll show you guys how that lines up. Okay, so once the crankshaft is in, as we see, this little mark lines up with this mark, and then once you spin it, make sure there's oil on that, because if you're spinning it, you have this piece, the crankshaft will wear into this piece if there's no oil. But this crankshaft cutout, which is right here, will perfectly line up with the hole, little hole that's in the balancer. So once that lines up, you know you have it balanced, and you can move on to the next step. So the next step will be to apply gasket maker. We used ultra gray and we applied a small amount on both sides of the crankcases. So what you do want to do before you put both of the cases together is you want to put your main gear shaft in, which is what the primary clutch rides on. So we have two types of small bolts, the shorter ones and the longer ones. So the shorter ones go on one side. The longer ones go on the side where the drain bolt is for the oil. So that's one way, you know. And then the larger bolts, there's 3 certain places where they go. It's quite obvious. Before you start to torque anything down, I'd obviously suggest you hand tighten everything completely. And then from there, you can torque them down. So all the small bolts, the larger bolts, the shorter bolts and the longer small bolts, those are 10 nanometers. And then the larger bolts, the thicker ones, which are, there's 3 of them, those are 25 nanometers. And that is according to the manual. These next ones are at 25. These are the larger ones. So on this side we have the longer bolts, and then we have 2 bigger ones.
Right here.
We have one inside there, and then one inside there. Five bolts of the longer ones. 1, 2, 3 down here, and then a 4 and 5. There we go.
2 of them.
So apart from those 5 bolts, we also have 2 down here. Okay, so we flipped it over here, and then we get this little black piece that covers these little gears. Got 2 bolts. We will torque them down to 10 nanometers. Yeah. Okay, so this screw on the side of your little transmission shifter, metal ball goes in this. Let's see. Yeah. We're about to flip this engine and then drop it on the ground. So we see it goes in there.
No, it's not.
Okay, so here's how you set this up. We have this on park. This little thing is up ways, this bend. It goes up. This is how it sets in. Now this is on park. We have this little bolt, screws in. This spring that we screwed in on top of this little thing, that's how it is. We didn't take this completely apart. So basically just twist that piece you just screwed in upways.
There's 2 points and this one goes between. And these 2 points are right here.
So here's the gasket that we have. That be a little standoff that goes in here. So if you have one, that's where it goes. We're just gonna go ahead and tighten them at 10 newton meters. So right here, we're just grinding off the carbon deposits off the valves before we install them back onto the engine. Okay, so it is now the next day, so the lighting might be a little different, but let's go ahead and set up the piston. Let's go ahead and put the piston rings on. So I have brand new piston rings. Now these two normal piston rings are different thicknesses. So if you don't know which one goes where, you can get the thicker one, and the thicker one will only fit in one place. It goes in the bottom one. So you could test fit it kind of like this. It fits in here perfectly, but to the top one it will not fit. Here's how it shows me to put the piston rings on, but I'll just go ahead and explain it real quick to you guys very simply. So here I have another Cfmoto piston, and yes, one of the piston rings could actually be flipped upside down. So if you look really closely, I believe this is the thicker piston on the bottom. It has a kind of like a slight cutout on the bottom. You want that cutout to be facing the bottom. For the other piston rings, you want to put the wavy piston ring in first for the bottom. It shows you want it to be set just like that. And then you want to proceed with the other two that go on the top and bottom. So after you set up your piston, what you want to do is put it on the piston rod. You want to use your connecting rod, and before you do that, you want to put your little snap rings on one side of the piston, and then once you put the connecting rod in and the piston is on, the connecting rod is all the way snugged up to the other side of the snap ring. You want to put your other snap ring. I mean, there's really no proper way to do this. You just got pliers. It's a little bit tough, but once you get those snap rings in and your piston in place, you should be good. The next thing here is you want to remove the little standoffs off your old cylinder bore. Just go ahead and heat up the aluminum, and then you want to get some clamping pliers and hammer the old bore down. They just pop out. And now to install them onto your new bore, you just kind of slowly hammer them in until you feel it's basically all the way in. No, I know. So in this next step, there are many different tools and ways to put the piston with the rings inside the cylinder bore. All we used is a flathead screwdriver squishing the piston rings, and then I held the piston bore and we just slowly set it in. This is obviously not how you're supposed to do it, but again, it's how we did it. You could do it a different way. Once we got it set in, everything moved freely and it was good to go. So good. So the first thing here is one of the chain tensioner pieces. We did put Loctite on that, just medium strength, and we just kind of torqued it down by hand, but if you want, it's 10 newton meters. Now the valves go on, so make sure not to forget your head gasket. These 4 larger bolts are 60 newton meters of force, and there's also 2 smaller ones that go in there. Those are both 10 newton meters. Now the next thing would be this little starting gear. It goes in with the larger sprocket going facing down if you're putting it into the engine. The other thing you want to do is get this little, there's plastic gears, you want to put that cover on with the 2 screws. Those are both torqued down to 10 newton meters. Now the magnetone assembly goes on here. It has the crankshaft has a little groove in it, and you need a little piece that goes in there, and the magnetone goes onto the crankshaft with that little groove cut out in the magnetone, kind of lining up obviously with that groove so it doesn't move anywhere. So it only goes one way. So then go ahead and add your gasket on this side. And you also have the hollow standoffs that go on this side. Some of them are for oil flow and some of them are just there to help you line up that part of the case. Now the other thing is there's a water pump, and you want to line up kind of, it looks like a flat head of the water pump onto a plastic piece that's on the engine. So here I just used the screwdriver to line it up, and this part of the case just snapped into place.
It's crazy.
So the next thing that goes here is this little plastic piece. It's kind of the whole assembly looks kind of like a turbo, but it's not. It's just a cooling system. I don't know how it cools anything, but once you have that into place, you have your little white flywheel that's plastic. The plastic flywheel is just torqued down with an impact gun. So the next thing is the timing. You want this top sprocket, there's two lines on it. You want both of those lines to be on the bottom and level to this bottom part of the engine. Now once you have those lines level, you want to unscrew, I believe it's a speed sensor or RPM sensor, but you'll see your magnetone. It has a mark on it, and you want to rotate it so that mark is in the top dead center. Now there's a little protrusion here on your case. Once you have that set, you can tighten your chain tensioner into your engine and you'll be all good to go. So once we have that on, we don't put on the other part of the plastic. The reason why is when we're setting it back into the machine, we don't want to break it. So once that engine is set back into the machine, the other part of the plastic is put on. It's just the little part, all hand tightened. There's no torque spec for that. Just make sure not to break it because it is plastic, is very fragile. Now moving on to the other side, you have where your clutch goes. It's the other side of the case. So there is gaskets here. You want to go ahead and install them before you put this piece on. And again, all these bolts, they're actually different lengths, but they're all 10 millimeters.
Well, I think the first one we're going to do is 4.
You go. So that is it for the video. I don't have any more footage since I did sell this side by side. So anyways, thank you guys for tuning into the video. I hope to have more videos out soon. I'll see y'all later.